Hello and God bless you. Well, today we are in part 8 of our Jesus in the Old Testament series. This will be the final story that we see a picture of a pre-birth Jesus in the Old Testament. God willing, next week we'll do a summary where we'll kind of do an overview of what we talked about and kind of what I was trying to convey in the series. But today we will be talking about our last time that Jesus, a pre-birth Jesus, was visiting someone in the Old Testament, because as we know, there are several scriptures in the New Testament talking about Jesus being, around since the creation of the world. He's always been there with God the entire time. Revelation 13:8, which is the first time I kind of really saw it. It says that there was a lamb slain from the foundation of the world. It talks about how the people whose names are not written in the book of life from the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. And it was talking about the mark. Of course, John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. And then in verse 14 it says, and the Word dwelt among us, and we beheld His glory. And it talks about how Jesus was with God from the beginning. And Jesus, the Word, became flesh and dwelt among us here on earth. And there's several different verses that talk about it. One thing that was kind of interesting when we talked about this series is John chapter 1 verse 18 says that no man has seen God at any time, but Jesus only. That's basically what it says. And like I've said, and I think I've said it in all 8 parts now. When I first initially heard that, I always thought I was saying that Jesus was saying that no one's truly seen God's presence. See God face to face. But Jesus only, because He was in heaven with Him. But maybe, and this is what people who I've seen that believe that people had seen Jesus in the Old Testament, God the Son, when they have an encounter with God, that this is what they're seeing, and that maybe that's what Jesus is saying, is that you haven't seen God. When people have had an encounter with God, they've seen me. They haven't seen God the Father, they've seen God the Son. Because it's all the same. And it's hard to comprehend that there's 3 different entities, beings, persons that are one. So, so if Jesus was the one that they've seen in these 8 stories, they've still seen God. They just seen God the Son, not God the Father. In part 1, we were in Genesis 15, where we talked about God talking to Abram, and He was telling him that he would have a descendant that would come from his own bowels, and his descendants would go into a foreign land for 400 years, and they'd come back out with great substance and become a great nation. And we see a word picture there of God as a burning lamp passing through pieces of an animal that was cut in half. The bullock, she-goat, and ram that Abram split into 2 pieces. And Jesus has a burning lamp. So we had the smoking furnace of God and the burning lamp in Genesis 15. In part 2, Genesis 16, we talked about Hagar, who Sarai had just given Abram as his wife so that she could have children through Hagar, her slave. And once Hagar became pregnant, she didn't respect Sarai any longer. So Sarai ended up being cruel to her because she knew that she lost respect. So Hagar fled to the wilderness, and she was visited by God, who told her to go back to her master Sarai and serve her. And the son that she has in her womb he will make a great nation. And in part 3, we've seen 3 men visit Abraham, because he was now called Abraham at this time. And they were on their way to Sodom and Gomorrah to destroy it. And God was one of those 3. And God tells Abraham that this time next year, Sarah will have a son. And that will be the one that he's made these promises through. And in part 4, we talked about Jacob, who was Abraham's grandson through Isaac. He gets the firstborn birthright blessing instead of Esau, because he deceives his father, pretends to be Esau. So after he deceives his father and gets the blessing, he's fearful that his brother's going to kill him, so he goes to where his mother Rebecca used to live. And that's where Abraham was whenever God told him to come to Canaan. So he goes to live with his mother's brother Laban, and that's where he gets his sons. But as on his journey to visit his uncle, he's in Bethel, and he stops for the night on his journey, because it wasn't like he could hop in a car and just drive there within a few hours. It took several days, or maybe weeks or months. So he stops there and he has a dream, and he sees a ladder that's that's coming down from heaven and onto the earth, and there's angels going up and down the ladder, and it says that he sees God at the top of the ladder. Now it doesn't say what he sees, it just says he sees God at the top of the ladder, and God talks to him. We don't know if he sees a man at the top of the ladder, or if he sees an angel at the top of the ladder, or maybe he just sees a light. And as I said last week, I didn't mention this in my video because God did bring it to me to later in my studies as I was reading the book of Genesis again. And God had showed me how in John chapter 1, Jesus is talking to one of his disciples that he just gets, sorry, my chair keeps creaking. But Jesus tells the disciple that he's seen him under the tree, and the disciple replies that he is the Son of God, the King of Israel, and Jesus replies, "You say I'm the King of Israel, the Son of God, just because I said I seen you under a tree?" Then he tells him that he's going to see greater things than that. He's going to see the angels ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. So maybe the word picture for what Jacob sees when he has this dream in Bethel, maybe it's a lot like this picture we have here. Jesus being the ladder that the angels are going up and down in Jacob's dream. And a symbol of Jesus is the cross. And as we see here in our picture, there's a picture of the cross, and there's a light shining down onto the cross and onto the Bible there. So maybe it was like the glory of God was shining down on top of that ladder, just like it's shining down on top of this cross. And God was talking to Jacob, excuse me. Then we went on to talk about Jacob again, when he was talking with God in part 5. And he wrestled with God, and God told him that his name would no longer be Jacob, it would be Israel, because his sons would become the nation of Israel. And in part 6, we talked about Gideon rising up to to fight the Midianites, because as we've seen in the book of Judges, like I said, it's several times where Israel do evil in the sight of the Lord. They would forget God, who got them into the promised land. Now they're living in the promised land. They forgot who got them there. They're doing what's right in their own eyes, and God would allow them to go into bondage by the nations surrounding them. So in 6 and 7, the Midianites are in control of the Israelites, and they're under bondage against the Midianites. And God visits with Gideon, and he tells him that he is going to deliver the children of Israel from the hand of the Midianites. And, he says that he's not an important person, that he's least among his family. But as we've seen in the next chapter that we covered in part 6, God does something miraculous that can only be God. Because Gideon has 32,000 people with him. But God takes it away to where now Gideon only has 300 men fighting. And they're facing an army that is innumerable. And it talks about how even just their camels was more than the sand in the sea shore. And that's just their camels. So it was innumerable men, a great army. Even if the 32,000 people they had, they would have been outmanned anyway. But God takes it down to 300, and He says He does that so that when they win, they won't think it's because of what they did. Like, look what I did. I was able to beat the Midianites. 300 men did not seem like a logical way to fight this army. Felt like there was no way they were going to be able to defeat this army, because 32,000 people, doing them down to 300. They were completely outnumbered then. But God brought a miraculous victory and freed them from the hand of the Midianites. Then we see in part 7, once again, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, did what was right in their own eyes. This time they were in bondage in the hand of the Philistines. And God visits the mother and father of Samson, and He tells them that they're going to have a baby, because she was barren and didn't have any children. But God visited her, and He told her that she's going to have a son, and he's going to be a Nazarite, and that he's not going to drink any strong wine or strong drink. He's not going to touch a dead body, and he's not going to cut his hair. And he's going to deliver them from the Philistines. And then God also talks to Manoah, tells him the same thing, gives him the same instruction, that he gave to Samson's mother, because Manoah wanted to know, how are we going to raise this child up? And God tells him that, I done told your wife what to do. Just do what I said, and I'll be with your child, and I'll help him to deliver Israel from the hand of the Philistines. So today, here in part 8, we are going to be in our last story, and there's definitely a lot more. I mean, whenever I was researching this, I'd seen different parts where they talked about believing that Jesus in the Old Testament, and just in my reading, I've seen other things that seem like Jesus in the Old Testament. But so it won't overwhelm you. This will be our last story that we tell. And like I said, next week, God willing, we will give a summary, just kind of giving you some information of why we, what we come up with this sermon series and everything. But today we're going to be in a story in the book of Daniel that I'm sure everybody knows. It's in Daniel chapter 3. We're going to read the entire chapter. It's 30 verses. Sorry for the long introduction. Just wanted to cover what we've covered so far. But here we are, Daniel chapter 3, verse 1. It says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, I hope I said the name right, in the province of Babylon. Then again, excuse me, let me take a drink. Got it dry here. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the province, to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. As we see here as a short little overview, the first half of the book of Daniel, there's a story about 3 Hebrew people, 3 Hebrew men. And of course Daniel is one of them. And the other 3 we're talking about today. In chapter 1, it talks about all 4 men. In chapter 2 and 5 and 6 are about Daniel. Daniel's in chapter 4 as well, but not as much as. But this story is the last time, and the second time, that the other men that the book of Daniel talks about are mentioned here. And that's what the first half of the book of Daniel is about, and the rest of it's about prophecy. And we go on to verse 3, it says, the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the province were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. They stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud, To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psalmody, delusher, sorry if I pronounced that word wrong, and all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up. And whosoever falleth not down and worshipeth the same hour be cast into the midst of a fiery furnace, burning fiery furnace, excuse me. Therefore at the time when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psalmody, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And like I said, we don't know what happened with Daniel in this chapter. It doesn't talk about it, so we don't know if he worshipped this image or maybe he was part of the story, part of authority where he didn't have to. We're not exactly sure. But it says, Therefore at the time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews, They spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whosoever falleth not down and worshipeth, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Now these are the other three men that the book of Daniel talks about in chapter 1 here in the book of Daniel. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are mentioned there as well. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel all were given Babylonian names. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are the Babylonian names for the three Hebrew children's names. Or they always call them Hebrew children. We don't know if they're actually children or not. But we do know that this is their Babylonian name, not their Jewish names. Because their names were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So Shadrach, was Hananiah. Mishael was Meshach, I guess. And then Abednego was Azariah. Yeah. There in verse 7 of chapter 1, it says that their names, because Daniel, his name was changed to Belteshazzar. I don't know how to say that word, but anyway. So basically, this is their Babylonian names, not their Hebrew names. Sorry, I just wanted to look that up real quick. But it's, they're telling that the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't fall down and worship the image. Anyway, let's go on. Then Nebuchadnezzar in his rage and fury commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up. Now if you be ready that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, sorry if I pronounced that word wrong, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made. Well, but if ye worship not, ye shall be cast in the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? So see right here, Nebuchadnezzar here is really challenging God. He's saying, look, when you hear the sound of music, fall down and worship through the image. Because if you don't, I'm going to set you into a fiery furnace, and you're going to burn. And is your God strong enough to deliver you out of that furnace? That's basically what Nebuchadnezzar was telling him right then and there. That's the David translation, the Pastor David translation there. Anyway, let's go on to 3:16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning furnace. He will deliver us out of thine hand. And see, when I hear this story preached a lot at church, they talk about this verse, then kind of skip on down to them being cast into fire. Because they said, because basically what they were saying is, it's kind of difficult to kind of tell the king, their answer, but they said, the God we serve is able. Because like I said, he was basically challenging God's authority, saying, if you hear the music, and you better worship my image, because if you don't, I'm going to cast you into a fiery furnace. And is your God strong enough to deliver you out of it? And they say, well, our God is able to deliver us out of the fiery furnace. And he will deliver us out of the fiery furnace, out of your hand. But I like what it says right here, because this shows faith. And this is what, it's kind of sad when I hear this story and people don't talk about this. Because I like what they say next. They say that our God is able to deliver us out of that fiery furnace and out of your hand. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the image which thou hast set up. See, that what they're saying here, and it's what's so sad that people don't preach this. And I'm not saying every preacher doesn't. Just that a lot of times when I personally heard this story preached in church, they don't talk about this verse. Because basically when they said that it's kind of hard to answer the king about the matter, is they're saying, look, we have faith in our God. We know that he is able to deliver us out of your hand and deliver us out of the fiery furnace. But even if he doesn't, and we die in that furnace, we'd rather do that and honor our God than to serve your false gods and worship your image. That's basically what he's saying. And if it's not a pre-tribulation rapture or we don't die before then, if we go through, us Christians, if we go through the tribulation, this is the attitude we have to have. Because the Antichrist is going to try to force us. Sorry, my belly is grumbling. But the Antichrist is going to try to force us to worship him. And he's basically going to be saying what Nebuchadnezzar said. Worship my image or die. Is your God strong enough to deliver you from me? So that's what they're saying is, our God is able. But even if he doesn't and we die, we'd rather die honoring our God than selling out for your false gods that you made with your hands that can't save us. So that's a strong, I love this verse right here. Daniel 3:18. Amazing verse. And that's who we have to have anything. Even if it's not going through the tribulation, There's anything that we can face. Just temptations in life. Peer pressures or, it's like all the, the things that we listed, the struggles that we have in life, feeling depressed or, just different things, Because like if you're depressed, but you're trusting God to get you through it, people are going to be like, oh, just do this and that and whatever that they believe can help you out of depression. Whatever it may be, whatever you're trusting God for, the world is going to try to show you another way that is not God. And we need to have this attitude. My God is able to deliver me through whatever I'm going through. And even if He doesn't, I'd rather die trusting in Him than going against Him and doing something else. That's the mindset we need to have as a Christian. That's why this verse is so important to me. And it's sad to me, like I said, when I don't hear it preached. Because this verse has power. Anyway, let's go on to the next verse. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more, that it won't be able to be heated. So by their answers, when they said, our God is able, but even if He doesn't, we're still trusting Him, and we're willing to die for what we believe in. And that made Nebuchadnezzar mad. And it says that his countenance had changed, pretty much is what it's saying. His face had changed. He went from kind of like... Because they talked about it, he was mad, but he was kind of probably willing to hear them out, wanted to understand why they didn't fall down and worship His image. But when they gave the answer, he was mad, and he's like, let's just take these people out. So he commanded that they heat the oven. They make it 7 times hotter than it normally would be. And we're going to see what exactly this does. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then those men were bound in their coats and their hosen and their hats and their other garments, and were cast in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was so urgent, the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of fire slew the men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So the Pastor David translation for this, if you don't understand what it's saying here, is that when Nebuchadnezzar commanded that the burning fiery furnace be cranked up 7 times hotter than it would normally be. And the fire was so hot that just the heat killed the men who were leading Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fire. It was that the heat was that hot. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished and rose up in haste, and spoke and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. Now this is a cool part, and this is the part that, while we're talking about this story today, just hit my computer. Verse 25, he answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. So see, for one thing, it said that they were bound. They were tied up in, their hands and feet were bound. They were, don't know exactly how they were bound, but they were, they were constrained. They were, like prisoners or something, and they went into the fire tied up. But here Nebuchadnezzar says that he sees 4 men who are not bound in chains or tied up. They're walking around loose. They're just walking around in the fire, and they're not being burned. And they threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, 3 different people, into the fire. But he sees 4 people walking about. He says the 4th looks like the Son of God. So I believe that Jesus, because of their faith, that they would serve God and was willing to die. A pre-birth Jesus was in the fire with them, protecting them from being burned. No hurt came to him, as it said. This is so awesome. God came down and protected them. And not only did he protect them, it's not like they had, like some type of force field around them. Jesus was there with them, walking in the fire with them. And they were protected from the fire. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and spoke and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth out of the midst of the fire. So see here, I don't know what the furnace looked like. I think about like furnaces today, or like an oven that we have, where it's got a door on it. We don't know if it was just like if it had a door, or it was just like a cut into a rock, kind of like a little cave that they had fire in. But what we do know is that Nebuchadnezzar came close to the door, the mouth of the fire, which makes me think it was like a little cave you cut out of a rock or something, because it says it came to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace. And he told Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to come out, and they were right in the middle of the flame, and they just walked right on out. Then the princes, governors, and captains of the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was the hair of their heads singed, neither was their coats changed, nor the smell of fire passed on them. And this is interesting right here too, because if you've ever lit anything on fire or anything, it burns up. Hopefully you've never seen it in real life, but maybe you're in a like a field of like a doctor, or a ambulance driver, or a fireman or policeman or something. Maybe you're somebody like that deals with accidents and stuff, or maybe just known somebody who's had it, been that, where they've been burned. The fire will burn your hair, singe it. Even if you just plucked the hair out of your head and took a lighter underneath it, you're going to see the hairs that's going to just go up. And if you've ever tried to light like a barbecue grill or something, and you kind of had your clothes a little too close to it, they'll kind of change. They'll kind of get a little hard right there or something. Or maybe try to burn a string. Like you had a little string hanging off your sleeve or something that was annoying you. So you took a lighter and just kind of lit it to, get rid of that string. Then you know what I'm talking about. If you've never done any of those stuff, then you may not know kind of what it looks like. Now, I've never seen anybody burned that I'm aware of, that I remember anyway, where, like their hair was burned off and their clothes was burned. I mean, I've seen it like on TV and movies and stuff, but I don't recall offhand if I've ever seen it in person. But it talks about how their hair wasn't singed, so their hair wasn't burned at all. Neither was their clothes. There wasn't any burn holes or any parts where the flame had, done anything to the clothes at all. And it also says that they didn't have the smell of smoke on them. As it said, the flame did not have power, had no power over them at all, because Jesus was protecting them. It's almost like they weren't in the fire at all. Then Nebuchadnezzar spoke and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel to deliver his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God." And once again, this changes Nebuchadnezzar's, feelings toward him. Instead of, he was mad because they said that they're trusting in their God, and even if he doesn't deliver them and they die, they're willing to die for what they believe in. So now Nebuchadnezzar said, "Blessed is the God that they serve, who is the true living God, who sent his angel to deliver his servants Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego out of the fire." "Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort." And see right here, Nebuchadnezzar's, mind has changed so much that he says, if anyone talks bad about the true living God, that person is going to be cut into pieces, because your God is the only God who can deliver someone out of the fire like that. No other God can do that. And that's why they're false gods. We serve the true living God, and he's the only one who could do this. And we may have never been in a fiery furnace, but we've all got testimonies of things that has happened in our lives that only God could have done it. And if you haven't, I believe you will sometime in your life. You will experience something that you'll look back and you'll think, only God could have done that. I know for me, whenever I had those dizzy spells and everything, and I was trusting God's word that I'd be healed, but I wasn't seeing it. And each day it was getting harder and harder I kept trusting God, so it wasn't harder and harder to trust him. It was just harder and harder to, give in a bit, I guess, As each day that went by, I was still praying and believing that God could heal me. But, I started wanting to, seek medical help. But God had delivered me from it. And it's something only God could have done. Because it was like, as quick as it came on me, it ended just that quick. Anyway, let's go on the last verse. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. And that's what we see in a lot of these first 6 chapters of the book of Daniel, is the king will promote, either Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego or Daniel, because God does something that only God could do. Like in chapter 1, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel, where a part of this group that would go before the king, and they were going to be drinking the king's wine and eating the king's meat. But Daniel said that they wanted, water and vegetables, and said, try us with that. If in 10 days we don't look better than anybody else, then we'll eat the king's meat and the king's wine. Because the meat was offered to idols. That's why they didn't want to eat the meat. It wasn't a thing because it was meat, it's because it was meat offered to idols. And Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel were promoted then. Then Daniel interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2. He's promoted. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego here in chapter 3 were promoted. In chapter 4, Daniel was promoted whenever he interpreted the writing on the wall. Then also after he was honored, Daniel was honored again in chapter 6, after he was delivered out of the lion's den, and the lions didn't hurt him. Anyway, I pray you got something out of this. If you did, give God glory. And I hope some of the things I brought out about some of the verses that you may not hear as much in church. And maybe the church you hear, you've heard that. If not, we're still not going to serve. Hopefully your church says that. Don't leave that part out. It seems like every time every church I've been to, when they tell this story, they talk about how they say that their God is able to deliver them out of their hand, and then they're bound and they're cast into the oven after it's been cranked up 7 times, and they talk about the man who carried them in dying, and them going in the furnace, and Jesus walking with them, and then they come out not even smell like smoke. They say all that, but they don't do that part that I was talking about in verse 18, where it said, our God is able, but even if he doesn't, we're willing to die for what we believe in. So hopefully your church says that part. I know mine doesn't. Like I said, it's sad, because it's an important part of that chapter, important part of faith. And encouragement, I believe, because, the world, like I said, I talked about the tribulation, if we're here for it and everything, how we'll be tempted like that. But even not, like just in the world right now, there's different things that we go through. And we can be trusting God to get us through whatever it is we're going through. But the world is going to try to give us these other ways, which may not be exactly, just flat out against God, but it could just be a way that, that's not trusting in God. It may not be like a clear, denying God type of thing, but it could be like it can be brought into a way where it doesn't sound like it's a bad thing. It's just let's just try this instead. Anyway, I pray you got something else. If you did, give God glory. Like I always say, pray before you read. Read the word for yourself. That way, that way you know exactly what the word says. Don't take my word, everybody else's for it. Because like I said, someone could be deliberately trying to lead you away from what the word says. Maybe someone doesn't understand. Or maybe the word is speaking to their circumstance, but not actually what the word says. So read it for yourself. Don't take my word, everybody else's for it. Pray before you read for God to show you what He wants you to get out of it. Read it, and then also pray for God to show you what you just read. That He reveals to you what He wants you to get out of that chapter. Just continue to have a prayer life with Him, because we're never too busy. Life can make us busy, with providing with families and things of that sort. But we got to make time for God. Like I said, even if it's just getting up out of bed in the morning, doing our morning routine, driving to work, just talk to God. Maybe instead of blasting the radio, you're just driving to work, dealing with some traffic jams and everything, just praying to God to give you strength for the day. I believe going to church is important. You may agree or disagree with that. That's fine. If you can keep your relationship with God at home, that's great. But what I think is good about going every service and everything is God filling you up to deal with the stresses that are outside the walls of your church. Because there's all kinds of stuff that's going to happen. That's going to try to draw you away from, just life just beating you down and everything, Stresses of trying to provide for your family, trying to put food on the table, whatever it may be. You need that strength. That's why we need to pray daily. Read God's Word. And if you can, be in church every day to worship Him and to seek to be filled to endure the challenges that are outside those walls. Continue to pray to Him daily. Just, seek a relationship with Him. Just like with a marriage, if you and your spouse don't ever talk, marriage ain't going to last long, because eventually they're going to get fed up of their spouse not ever talking to them. And if you're not talking to God, then you're not knowing what God wants for your life and everything. And sometimes we don't, it can happen. Not saying that it doesn't. But a lot of times God doesn't talk to us audibly like we would have a conversation with, our family member or our neighbor. We may not hear His voice audibly, like someone else can hear. But God does talk to us if we seek Him. He may not talk to us right away, or maybe we may not be listening close enough. But just like a relationship with a marriage, we got to communicate with God. So pray to Him, read His Word. Anyway, that's all we're going to have for this week. I love you. God bless you. I hope you have a great week. God willing, next week we will do our summary, unless God gives me something different. We'll do our summary of the series. I hope you enjoyed the series. Like I said, I think it's just a fun little series just to kind of see where people may have encountered God the Son in the Old Testament before He was born, because we know that He was there from the foundation of the world. Anyway, I love you. God bless you. Hope you have a great week. We'll see you next week, God willing.